That will never work. You can't push that. Seriously? Don't. Oh my God, that's other things you can do. That's bad. You probably should find other hobbies. You ever learn how to spell? Stop. Be happy. While you're you don't bother me. I've seen better people. Do you really want to do that? And my third grade, give it up. Welcome to Horrible Writing, the rawest, most candid, in-your-face writing show on the interwebs because none of us have time to suck. Let's do this.
I got my glasses on. This means it's official. It's official. So the first ever Horrible Writing Writer Support Group event on camera. It's supposed to be a Facebook Live, but according to Facebook, they took those privileges away in the fall, and nobody at Facebook deemed it appropriate to notify me that they were changing how they did Facebook Lives, and you can't have multiple people on Facebook Live anymore. Who knew? I did about an hour and a half before we did this, so we are now on Zoom. So everybody who's here, hey, I am so happy to have a bunch of horrible writers here, and I say that with all the affection in the world. And I want to introduce you to Rebekah, Kelley, and Jake. Now, Rebekah, Kelley, and Jake, you're our three resident pros. You will have to speak for and defend yourself to include our introductions. However you feel most comfortable. But essentially, and we can start with Kelley. She's over here on the left-hand side of the screen, and she was the first one here. So we'll go Kelley, Jake, and Rebekah. But who you are, what got you into designing, how long you've been designing for, and then any genres that you specialize in. So Kelley, let us hear from you, please.
I'm always the nervous one to go first. My name is Kelley. I own and operate Sleepy Fox Studio. I got started in 2011, I believe, doing covers for Entangled Publishing. I just kind of fell into it because it was something different and it was something that was fun to do. And I design across a lot of genres, but I mostly do a lot of LGBTQ fiction and fantasy.
I'm glad you could join us. Thank you. All right, Jake, take it away.
All right. I'm Jake, and I run and operate J. Kelley Design, I guess, studio. I just call it J. Kelley Design, but I've been doing covers for around 6 years now, full-time covers for the past 3 years, and I do a wide range of them. Most of them fall into the fantasy, sci-fi, urban fantasy genres, and I really enjoy it. I've always loved art, and I've always loved graphic design, and sometime in college, the idea popped up in my head that, book cover design might be the best of those worlds. And so I remember telling the girlfriend that I had at the time that I wanted to be a cover artist, and then 10 years later I started becoming one. So it was a long journey, but I eventually got there. So.
Awesome. All right, and last but not least, Rebekah.
Hi there, guys. I'm Rebekah. I grew up in a tiny town on an isolated island in Alaska, wishing I could see something other than the same view I saw every day. So basically, I was like Moana, except for with more parkas and thermal underwear. But I was, because of where I grew up, I was a huge fantasy nerd, and that was my escapism. And I would choose the books based on the covers. Whatever cover art was like the best, that's the book that I would pick up in the bookstore. And I idolized like Daryl K. Sweet and the legendary fantasy illustrators. So I run vividcovers.com, and I've been illustrating and designing for independent authors for about 7 years now. And I do a lot of illustration. Illustration is what I love. That is just that's my favorite thing. And so I ended up doing a whole lot of science fiction and fantasy, particularly because those are the two genres where there is the most illustration. Illustration is, as common or even more common than photo manipulation or other types of art that you put on the covers. So science fiction and fantasy, those two really are my jam. I think my favorite part of the whole design process with clients is when they see what I have done for them, like they see like the finished thing like for the first time, and they get to, there's something special. I'm also a writer, so I know there's something special when you see something that has only ever existed in your brain and you see it visually in color, you know, there's just something special about that moment. And I live for that moment. It just really exciting being able to take people's ideas and make them live, you know, so.
I think it's cool that to hear that. I can actually hear it in your voice too, Rebekah, that it means that much to you as well. Because I know it feels like that for me when I get to see those ideas actually brought to life. And that's I think one of the most satisfying and rewarding experiences that I didn't anticipate in this author journey was being able to kind of throw a bunch of stuff against the wall at somebody and have them actually create something tangible out of it. It's absolutely amazing what you all can do.
And it's never quite what you see in your brain. It's never quite, but sometimes I feel like sometimes that's part of the fun, is because you can see somebody else's interpretation of your words. And you, as a writer, you know how it comes out. You don't know how it's consumed on the other end, you know? You're never fully sure what that experience is like, but I feel like you could see a little bit of that when you see how your cover designer interpreted your words, you know? I don't know.
Absolutely.
Cool.
No, absolutely. Especially when you have a fit 20-something main character and your book designer creates an interesting book cover for your first book. Isn't that right? Natalie's already laughing because she knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Uh-oh, what happened?
we had a little mastermind group beta test. Jake does covers for me, and the first draft he did of a cover, there was a little a little graphical manipulation. It was a neat effect maybe, but it was very entertaining for all of us because you have a bunch of Gen Xers and older millennials in this group, and we all turned to friggin' teenagers when we looked at a certain aspect of the cover, and
it was a wrinkle in his shirt.
The place where look at Natalie's face. Natalie's face, you can, we turned into children when we saw that. It was a good conversation. All right, so we've got a ton of questions. Adina's here. Adina, thank you for the questions you sent in. I'm going to get to those. And if you are here, I will turn the chat on as well. I'm just trying to make sure I got that initial rush of people out of the way, so I actually didn't accidentally miss somebody, but Trisha's got some stuff as well. And Beto, it's so cool to actually see you here. Now we've got a face behind the mysterious name in the group. It's really awesome to have all you here. So let's do it. Okay, now to set the conversational tone, because we all have a different journey as writers, and I want to make sure that everybody's able to hear what these three pros are going to have to say without any kind of reaction blocking that. So this isn't a do-it-yourself versus pro battle, okay? That's not what we're here to do. I asked these three to come on because they have experience and the expertise, and they make killer stuff, awesome stuff, and we can all learn from that. So please, let's all just shelve that aspect of this conversation, because that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the covers themselves. But
can I say
no, go ahead,
real
Rebekah.
quick?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to put in that most of us actually also have experience mentoring authors who are working on DIY covers. So we can cover that whole spectrum. You know, if anybody has questions about DIY, when it's appropriate, what will increase their chances of success, that sort of thing. We all have experience helping authors do that. So it definitely does not need to be an either or sort of situation.
I'm so glad you said that. That's actually a great thing we can hit on. So if you do have a question about what Rebekah just offered, make sure you just jot a little note for yourself, because I will open the chat pod here in a second. I want to get the conversation going about elements on a cover though. So for the three of you, we started with Kelley first last time. So Kelley will shift and make Jake go first this time. Put the pressure on Jake to answer this one. When we're talking about elements, when I'm an author, for all three of you, chime in whenever you feel comfortable, but as an author, I know what a good book cover looks like in my genre when I go to Barnes and Nobles and it's there on the shelf. But when I'm trying to communicate it to you, the artist who doesn't have the idea in your head, I might not be able, ironically enough, as an author, be able to find the words to communicate to you the elements I'm looking for. So whatever that means to the three of you as designers, I don't want to frame that too narrowly for you. So when you've got an author coming to you and they're trying to explain stuff, what are some of the elements of book covers that you might be able to help them focus in identifying so you can get a clearer picture of what they're actually looking for?
Well, for me, I'm a visual person because I do visual things. I like seeing what they're talking about. If there's you've seen this cover at Barnes & Noble that you like, I'd like to see that cover. And often if I compare it visually with your words, I can sift it out. With me been doing this for a while now, the way authors phrase things and stuff, I can kind of sift out what they might be trying to really say if it's not that clear. But for me, my big thing will be just visual aids, I guess. If you can send me the covers you're talking about, the ones that you think stick out, and not to try and emulate those or to copy those, but this works well. This cover works well because I think da 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 da. And as a designer, I should be able to extrapolate what it is you're trying to want to convey into the cover that we're going to do together. So for me, if you can just, have some visual aids, that helps me tremendously.
Rebekah, you can follow up with that if you wanted to, or Kelley.
Yeah.
I exactly what Jake said. I love it when people attach images to their briefs and they show me examples of covers in their genre and maybe with the same tone that they're looking for, and also covers that just suit their own personal taste, because authors have, you have a personal aesthetic, and we don't want it to just be a good cover for your genre. We also want it to be something that you're going to look at and you're going to enjoy and you're going to personally feel gratified looking at it. So I really, really like it when people include images, because again, like writers are word people, artists are visual people. So if you can attach images and if you can articulate what it is that you like about a certain cover, that's good. You don't necessarily need to use artistic terminology necessarily. If you know that, here's the thing, if you know the art terminology, use it. If you're not sure, don't, because if you use a term wrong, it can just cause so many problems. I wrote a book called Cover Your Book, which was intended to help people navigate basically the relationship with a designer and try to get the best out of your designer, how to research your genre and make a really good brief. And in there, I talk about a lot of the commonly used terminology in the artistic world so that you can communicate those things better. But I think one of the things that can be helpful if you're not sure what words to use is just talk about how the different aspects of the cover make you feel. Like if you send me a cover and you're just like, I just like how this is just pow. This just punches me in the face. I love how that feels like this image is punching me in the face and I want that on my cover, I understand that. I understand what you're looking for. I understand the artist me knows you're talking about composition and contrast. You might not know that, but I know that. So if you tell me, I just like how this is bam, in your face and I just it grabs you, I know how to parse that into the artistic terminology and how to approach that as an artist.
For me, on my questionnaire that I have my clients fill out, kind of like Rebekah and Jake said, I have a specific section that's dedicated to asking them to kind of do some research and look up covers in their genre or covers that are similar to theirs in tone or mood. And show me covers that they're drawn to and covers that they hate, because sometimes I'll do something but I'll put a little bit of a new spin on it to try to make it unique and they're like, okay, but I hate that one thing. So knowing what they don't want is just as helpful as knowing what they do want, and it kind of helps set up that expectation that they will go out and do that homework themselves and know what their cover needs to look like to be hitting the right audience. A lot of times authors don't always realize how important that is.
So I do want to just hit pause here real quick to remind everybody, if you are jumping in or falling out and jumping back in, just please make sure you should be muted, but just make sure that you are, that way we can keep the sound down and everybody can here, because I'm going to lose track of the attendees and whatnot while we're going through this. All right, so for our 3 panelists, Rebekah, you get to go first this time, please. This is kind of a bigger thematic type question, but I wanted to intentionally hit it earlier in the conversation because I know folks are going to have very specific questions later on. This is something I didn't think about until, I think a lot of you know Mel Cooper, until she made a comment at 20 books to a 50K about branding in your book covers, and I'd never thought about it. I like Rebekah, you were talking about the BAM, right? This book cover just bammed me in the face, and and that's all I ever worried about was the BAM factor. I never thought about branding. So for the 3 of you, how important is it for an author from book number 1 to start identifying what their brand is in the design process, and how do you guys typically lead them, or do you, I should say, I shouldn't actually put you in that corner, but do you lead them to help them maybe try to parse out a little bit of what their brand is?
I feel like most of my clients have done a lot of the branding work prior to coming to me, but branding is something that is achievable through a consistent look across your covers, and it can be a consistent look within a series, and it can be a consistent look across a number of series. So I think it's really, really helpful when you can find, and I know that this is a difficult thing to do and it takes some time, is to find that one designer or that one illustrator who you work really well with. Because having one person's work consistently on your work throughout the series, especially if it's illustration. Illustration is really, really hard to change illustrators mid-series. There's just no way for them to make that transition look seamless. However, another aspect of branding is the font work that you use. The font work for your author name, the font work for your titles and that sort of thing, and making sure that's consistent. And that can kind of, it's not always possible to work with the same designer throughout an entire series, and it's okay to change designers. But if you have strong, consistent font work across the entire series, that's going to help smooth out some bumps. I think the best thing that an author can do coming to me and saying, how can I emphasize my branding or distill it down to something that can be more uniquely me, that my readers can see and identify with me, a lot of that is going to require a lot of back-end research on the author's part. You need to understand your genre really well. You need to understand like who your competition is, what covers your cover is going to be next to, what language your genre, the covers in your genre are using to speak to your audience, because each genre and even subgenre has a slightly different, it's communication, and I like to say they all have little different dialects, and you need to, as an author, have an understanding of those things in order to make the right decisions, because although we are artists and we are here to help and guide you, you're ultimately the one that gets to say, no, we're not doing this, or yes, please do this instead. You are always the one calling the shots. So if you are educated before you come to that position where you're calling those shots, you have a better chance of ending up with a good cover and with identifiable branding that your readership is going to be able to look at a cover and say, that's one of his. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think we see a lot of, of course there's series branding, but with author branding, I think we see it a lot in like the cozy genre, where there are certain authors, big name authors, that just have a very distinct look. Like Rebekah said, probably always done by the same designer, same exact style, very different. I mean, not even within the same series, but you see the style of cover and instantly know who it is. And that's, colors, composition, fonts, even, something so much as the size of your model. If you're doing an urban fantasy and you've got a model's headshot on the first cover, but then you've got a full body on the second cover, there's just going to be kind of a little bit of a disconnect there when they're standing next to each other.
Yeah, I agree with Kelley and Rebekah. Branding is consistency, and that's what it is across the board. And you do that over and over and over and over again, and you develop your look. I mean, it doesn't happen with one cover. It happens as you continually do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. I'm wrapping up this week a 16-book series, and and I've used the same model, the same lighting setup, the same lighting rig and DAS and all that throughout all 16 covers. So I've got the poses change, the background changes a little bit, but overall the colors have stayed the same. And when they're side by side, I mean, it's one massive, you can tell this is consistency across the board. And, we went into it with that in mind. And, the brand develops as you make more. And so, it's just sticking to it, well, if it's a series or if it's something that you're wanting to go broad with your author name, how it's handled or anything like that. Whatever you choose, you just keep doing that over and over and over again, and that helps develop, that brand or your brand as an author or your brand in that series. So
To add on to that, to answer the other part of that question, I generally want to know when up front if they're planning a series for something, because that does make a difference. If they're wanting a certain model on the cover, I need to know that there's multiple options for that model if it's a stock photo, and we're not going to get to book 2 and realize we literally can't keep any kind of consistency because of how we've set up the first cover.
I'm glad you all said that. So that kind of ties in with the next question, right? Because you all know, you've dealt with authors a long time, and you yourselves, right, as well. One of the things that constantly comes up in the Facebook fights, the Twitter fights, the Reddit fights about getting a pro designer is cost, right? It's scary. It can be a significant thing. So you just talked about, trying to find that designer, the branding, don't lose the forest because you're only looking at that tree because of things like the model. If we go one way on book 1 and then we find out it's a series we were doing, 16-book series, that changes things. So for us, those are things that as authors we have to balance. With you all, in terms of how we look at that, what are some of the things that you would recommend from the designer, the business aspect of being the designer, how much you're charging, what types of things affect those costs up front? What would you want this group of horrible writers to be thinking about in terms of that? I've got a couple books I'm going to do. That's, and I want to go get a cover on the first 2 or the first 3, but we don't really know how much. What factors impact cost for a design, and then if we could follow that up for a series design?
For me, a lot of it depends on obviously how much time is going to go into it. I started offering kind of a budget package because I did have a lot of clients that have been with me for years that maybe want just a contemporary romance cover. It's simple. It just needs to look nice, and usually they have their images picked out. A lot of them use exclusive stock that they buy, and I really couldn't justify charging them my normal rates for something that was taking me half the time. So if they're going to do the homework and do the research and find the images that they want, that saves me an awful lot of time of having to set something up in DAS and having to paint and having to look up stock photos myself. Yeah, that's probably the biggest cost factor for me is how long I think something's going to take. And I do offer a series discount because once you've got kind of that template and that base of knowing what the series needs to look like, it's just kind of a matter of, okay, well, now we just need to swap out these elements for the new ones, but I don't have to refigure out where my text is going to go and my text effects and, the types of color schemes I'm using. It's established, so it saves me some time.
Jake or Rebekah, you want to jump in and add to that at all?
I was going to wait on Rebekah because she is really good at that kind of stuff, articulating.
She looked like she was waiting on you.
Hi. Oh, well, I mean, I mean, for me, like, when you talk about the cover price, I mean, not only, what Kelley said about some cover designers do offer discounts for, continuing on in a series. And some don't, and that can vary because of the base cost of the covers. Also, you got other factors of where designers live, cost of living. You also have the designers, their speed. Some cover designers, end up spending, they can spend 5, 10, 15 hours or 20 hours on covers. Other cover designers spend half the time. They don't spend half that time. So, I mean, the cover, when you go to a designer's website and you see their price and, they do quality work, that back end, you don't know. It's hard to know how much time they're putting in that or how much time they ain't putting into it. And so the prices can run the gamut of, from really, really cheap to really to expensive covers, or, where when you're budgeting out for a series as an author, you've got to take into effect. And if I sign with this cover artist, then I'm going to have this much money across, 3 or 4 books or whatever, that can really start to add up, especially if you're going to want those covers. But if you're going to do like a quick release and you're going to want to bam, 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 you're going to go, I would imagine, go down. You're going to go down in your budget, and then you're hoping that as your series grows that you get back into the black, as far as it goes. So I don't even know what the question was to begin with. I just started off with this.
I got something. I can save you, Jake.
Save me, Rebekah, 'cause I don't know.
I just wanted to put out there, I think a lot of us tend to do math for how much work ought to cost by trying to break it down into some kind of hourly wage or equate it to time. And I kind of want to have authors and designers please move away from that, because that's math that works for unskilled labor. That's math that works for, bagging groceries or the drive-through window at McDonald's, which are, I'm not disparaging these jobs, okay, but these are unskilled labor jobs. When you try to take what a cover designer does and break it down into an hourly wage, what you are not considering is the 25 years that I have been doing art. You know what I'm saying? The math doesn't work when you try to pull that in. You know what I'm saying? So trying to look at it as like an hourly exchange of time doesn't really equate on the front end. Does that make sense? It does matter how much time work is going to take us. For instance, if I have one cover that's going to take me 20 hours and I have one cover that's going to take me 40 hours, you know what I'm saying? And I'm getting paid the same for both of those. One of those is obviously, we all have the same number of hours in a day. One of those covers is more profitable for me, and one of them is less so, because for the one that takes less time, I could have done 2 of them. You know what I'm saying? So I think trying not to think of it in terms of what is your hourly wage as an artist, especially because you as an author, you're not going to know. You're not going to know how much time it's taking your artist to produce that work. I think you have to evaluate it on its face. Personally, for me, I do take into account the time for when I am setting up the rates for my different packages. For me particularly, most of the time that goes into a custom work is just in that feedback loop. It is the feedback and revision loop, and that can just take up an enormous amount of time and effort, and sometimes redoing things that I've already done, and repainting things, etc. So I also, like Kelley, I have a less expensive package where you basically give me your concept, I create a cover, you have the option to either buy it or I sell it as a pre-made, one or the other. You know what I'm saying? But what that does is that cuts out the most time-consuming aspect of the custom process. I think a lot of authors, when they're thinking of what the cost of a cover might be, they're thinking of things like, well, how much the images cost and how much the fonts cost, et cetera, et cetera. We're artists. We have a lot of images. We have a lot of fonts. We accumulate those things as part of our job. So those probably won't be a particularly significant part of the cost of your cover, but it's how you fit into the workflow, what my schedule is like. Am I booked out into 2021? You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you will see a couple of covers that will to an author will seem equivalent, but one of them is twice the price. Well, you have to ask, who's the one making that second one? There are certain designers who are really, really in demand in the industry because their covers are on some just real knockout bestsellers, and people want their covers, and the cover art industry works on supply and demand the way any other industry does. So that will also factor into it. Also, how much of a hurry are you in? If you want me to pull some all-nighters, I'll do it for you, but it's going to cost you. You know what I'm saying? I do think that something that authors don't do, just because, especially because covers are just such a huge investment. One of the things, they'll do one cover at a time, you know, and they'll just sort of parcel it out like that. Every cover designer and illustrator I know will give you a break for booking several covers at once. Often it will be a significant break, and you can really save a lot of money if you're just willing to like go all in and make that commitment for all 3 covers or all 5 covers or I don't know, Jake, all 16
all
covers.
16.
You know what I'm saying? You will get a significant break for that, because the artist will be able to establish a workflow for your series and just, I mean, it's not as easy as just stamping them out. Obviously, there's a lot of creative work that goes into each thing, but there are things that you can replicate across a series. And once, I don't know, Kelley, Jake, are you guys like this? Once you get a flow going, doesn't it just sort of start to, authors, you know the flow state when you're writing, and it just starts to come out of you like that. If your kid comes to the door and interrupts you and is like, Dad, where's the peanut butter or whatever, I mean, how does that affect your flow?
Don't even get me started on that.
if you have a 6-hour block to just, I mean, you get into that flow state, and something similar happens with art, and it can happen with across art projects. So if I have a client that I just need to do 6 covers for them, I can get into that flow state with those covers. And I don't know what it is about that flow state, but I kind of feel like sometimes those covers turn out better because there's that special part of the magic part of the brain that turns on, and I feel like I'm more creative with that. So if you can, I know not everybody can, and you have your own personal, you know, limitations with your budget and with your schedule and that sort of thing. If you can book covers in advance, it will have a positive impact on how much you're spending.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I did just do someone had bought a pre-made a couple months ago, and then when she started writing it, she came back for a continuation and booked the rest of the 6-book series all at once. And it made it so much easier, because it's also like if you're writing a book and you set it aside for a month or 2 and you come back, you're kind of like, what was I doing? And you're going back through 200 layers in Photoshop trying to remember, all right, what was my process for this, and how did I do this effect? And it really is so much easier if I can just say, all right, next 4 weeks, 1 cover a week, I'm knocking out this whole series. Yeah, I would be happy to offer a little bit, you know, more of a discount for my authors that do that. Plus, I mean, for us, having that bigger paycheck at once is helpful.
That makes sense. Though I have to argue, Kelley, it doesn't have to be 2 months. I can come back to work to a story 10 minutes after I took a break and come back and say, what am I doing? So
that's fair.
Okay, so I've got a question that might scare some of the writers in this group who haven't been through the, hey, I need a cover, can you give me a cover process yet? And it's a real easy one, and I want to get to a couple of questions from other folks. So keep your answers as short and as biting as you can, you know, for that hook, for that impact. How far out are you booking covers for the 3 of you? How far out are you booking covers right now, except for like rush orders?
Should I go first, or are we scared?
I think
March 2021.
March, oh geez. Jake, we need to talk after this.
I had my schedule out almost a year for a while there, but I've come to the end of it. And so I'm booking out next month.
Wow, okay.
which is unusual for me, but I've noticed that bookings come in waves, and I will book out for 6 months, or I'll book out for a year, and then I'll be like, hey, I can start your cover next month if you want, you know? So.
I'm booked out through the rest of June. To be fair, I work very quickly. My turnaround time is really fast, and I'm not doing quite as much illustration as Rebekah and Jake do. So, I mean, a lot more time goes into their stuff than it requires for me. I do mostly DAS and, you know, some minimal overpainting. But so I took on about 19 customs this month, and it was a lot. And I'm booked out through probably halfway through July.
Okay. And Jake, you were being serious, March 2021?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, hey, for the new neophytes.
Jake's a big deal. I'm not sure if you were aware of this, but Jake's a big deal.
no, I'm not a big deal.
He is a big deal.
He is.
Well,
yeah.
The only reason I got my series done by him is because I followed him around 20 books for
I remember that conversation.
For about 3 days, hanging outside his hotel room, something to do. And folks, I'm joking. That's a joke for anybody who watches this recording later and is like, oh, I just have to stalk Jake to get his. No, please don't do that. All right.
He gets stopped in the bathroom at 20 books.
Oh, God.
She was a sweetheart, though. Oh, my gosh, she was a sweetheart.
Right.
If you were watching, that was totally okay.
All right, so Tiffany has a question for you all. I think I know what you're going to say, but I'm interested to hear your comments. For the designers, do you find it helpful to read the author's work to make a good design for that work's cover?
I'll start this one. No. And it's absolutely no reflection on whether the book is good. I've had clients whose books I've read after I've done the covers because it looked interesting. I'm also an author. I hate doing my own covers. I'm too close to the story. I just don't like it. It's not fun for me. I'm my own worst client. And if I'm trying to design something for a story that I've read, I encounter a lot of the same issues. I have a harder time taking a step back and picking out the most important things of what needs to be on that cover because I'm too invested in the story itself.
I'd say the same thing for sure. It's a couple of things. One of them is time investment. It's going to take me hours to read your book. I mean, I'm not a terribly slow reader. I'm not a speed reader, but it's going to take me hours to read your book. And so how we were talking about, you know, the price of a cover, we kind of figure out how long it's going to take us to complete that project. That's just, I don't know. I got an hourly rate. If you were like dead set on me reading your book, I'll do it for that hourly rate. But it's not going to benefit, I promise you, it's almost certainly not going to benefit me because like what Kelley said, good design, I feel like for a book requires a little bit of distance. It requires some emotional distance from the subject matter so that you can just distill it down. And it's kind of like writing a blurb. It requires you to just pluck out a couple of like the most salient points. I'm releasing some fiction at the end of the year, and I tried my hand at writing my own blurb. It was all right. Finally, I went and got Brian Cohen to do my blurb for me, and dang, did he knock it out of the park. Oh my gosh, I read it, and it was so good, and it was perfect, and I was like, I never would have thought to talk about the story in this way because I was too close to the material. Covers are the same. You need a little bit of distance, and reading your book will eliminate that distance for your cover artist. In most circumstances, I would say that is the case.
Yeah, I agree. I'd be no. And mine, same reason as Rebekah, also I'm a extremely slow reader. I read like every day, and I read 12 books a year. So like, you know, it would take me forever. And I actually had a client pay me to read his book about 2 years ago. He paid me decent.
Do you think the cover was better for it?
No, it was not. But I had a bigger paycheck on that one. But no, it wasn't any better. Like I had the idea before we got started, and then.
So y'all, if you want to just get rid of if you got too much money, and it's weighing you down. Okay, maybe consider paying your artist to read your book.
I would say no, and I would say don't offer it. Don't send them the manuscript, because I mean, like, we're not going to read it. I mean, this is not time. Just doesn't, just isn't going to work. Yeah.
Like Kelly, I have sometimes read clients' books after the fact because the process of making the cover has interested me in it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's usually not helpful on the front end.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
So, I'm sorry, Jay. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I've read after too. Like, I've read my client's work because I like their cover, so I read it after.
The cover attracted me to the book, for sure. Look to me.
So Adina's got some good technical questions I think scares the heck out of all of us. What things should be stipulated in the work contract between the writer and the designer?
Okay, I'll go for it. Paul, you gotta cue us, otherwise we're gonna be all so polite to each other.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Like, I went first last time, so.
we're all thinking about not stepping on each other's toes. Anyway, so with the contract, in my opinion, okay, my opinion of this is that, and I like give example agreements and stuff in the book that I wrote, but you don't necessarily need a contract full of legalese, but you do need an agreement that states what's being delivered, okay? So what are they doing for you? What is the time frame in which they'll get it to you? What are the files that you're going to get on the back end? How many revisions, like rounds of revision, are they going to just revise it until the next millennium if you feel like it? Or how many like mock-ups or preliminary sketches do you get? And what most important is, what can you do with the art once you have it? What are the rights that you have over the art? Are you allowed to put it on a movie poster? Are you allowed to put it on a coffee mug that you're going to sell off of your website? Are you allowed to, I don't know, use it for, are you allowed to resell it? Are you allowed to get another artist to come in and modify it? Those are all things that need to be stipulated in the contract. I will say it is entirely possible to get full rights to do anything that you want, even claim it's yours, okay, in a contract. But rights cost money, okay? So if you want full rights over a creative work, that's going to cost you more than just getting the rights to use it as a book cover in perpetuity, okay? So consider that. But also the way that the art is produced, if there's stock imagery used in it, etc., you may not be able to get full rights over that because the designer has licensed the rights for those stock images on a limited basis from the stock company. So I think those are the most important points to hit with your contract.
The stock photo thing, all of the websites are different. They're pretty similar, but most of them have, a limited number of print runs, usually around 500,000. And some of them have stipulations about printed products such as mugs or t-shirts or things like that, where you could make one for your personal use if you just wanted one for yourself, but if you wanted to make 20 of them to pass out, you're going to have to purchase the extended license for every photo that was used in your cover, and that can add up if your designers used 8 different, various pieces that they put together, and that extended license can cost you from anywhere from $50 up to a couple $100 depending on the website. So that adds up really, really fast. It also, I've seen a lot of arguments on this about some people wanting or feeling that they are entitled to the unflattened artwork, the PSD files. And that is not the case with a designer that knows better, especially because of that stock licensing thing. We can't send you something that's got all of the stock images that we purchased in any kind of an extractable form. You're paying for a final product. You're not paying for access to all of our work and our work secrets.
Kelley, when you say that, just for us who don't play around in manipulating images and whatnot, are you talking about with that PDF, like I could take out a layer and I could get isolate a model from that cover? Is that what you were meaning when you were talking about the unflattened?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So it would be, if I were to send a PSD file, a raw PSD file that's unflattened, it would have every stock photo that I had in there. It would have every layer of effects. And I mean, we get up to 200 or 300 layers in a single cover. And that's letting someone go in and potentially change whatever they want. And modify things as they please. They could take out stock photos and reuse them elsewhere, which is against the licensing terms. And even just trade secrets that all of us have. I mean, like Rebekah said, there's a price for everything. If you want all of that, then I'll work something out with you. Yeah, but I mean, unfortunately, I see a lot of authors that think that that's like an automatic thing that they get, and there are some designers that just don't know any better.
So make sure that you're putting in, you can send it, some of you are sending questions privately, that's cool too. But if I put it in the chat pod, but I don't know if I caught everybody's attention with it. If you've got a question while they're actually addressing a point to a question, just put my name in caps so it'll kind of like help me jump out. We can make sure we hit that while they're still talking about it. Okay, so let's jump into genre conversations. I don't want to necessarily go down a rabbit hole with everybody's specific genres. If we can kind of keep it, 20,000 foot view for those of us who are Air Force. I don't know what you old Marines did there, Erica, but so that's what we used to say about the big picture of things, okay? So genre specifics, if you guys can, and I'll start with Kelley this time so that way I can actually prompt you all. I've learned my lesson. But like maybe the genres you're all comfortable talking about so you don't have to speculate what other genres, but as authors, what are some of the genre expectations? I saw a huge Reddit conversation within the past week about urban fantasy because I'm moving into urban fantasy, and the urban fantasy firestorm was, we're so sick and tired of seeing young fit females with cool weapons in their hands right in the middle of an urban fantasy cover. We want something new. Why don't authors, because it's always our fault, why don't authors give us something new? And then a few authors were brave enough to jump in and try to explain, the market, the way the market drives the covers, and it turned in, as online discussions often do, it turned into a huge mess. So for genres, can you talk to us about that? What are some of the expectations that a market has for romance and the different stovepipes of romance in sci-fi, fantasy? And if there's anybody in the audience who has something that's not sci-fi, fantasy, romance, thriller, horror, the big umbrella terms, please chat it in so we know, and maybe they'll get to see that, and we'll make sure that if they can talk to that. So Kelley, if you don't mind, we'll start with you on that.
I will be the first to admit I get so tired of some of the genre tropes. I get so bored with the romances that have the bare-chested men and the fit, skinny models in urban fantasy, but it's what sells. It's what is selling those books, and people can say that they don't like it all they want, but the market is still speaking that that's what is getting people to buy those books. Your cover is essentially promising what's going to be inside, and that's all of those things. If you see a spaceship on a cover, you're going to know that spaceships play a part, or should play a part, somewhere in that book. You're not picking up a contemporary romance. And a lot of it's also what the authors are writing. If the authors aren't writing something different, then their cover's not going to look any different either. I'm starting to see a lot more of my clients, even I do stock renders and things like that, so some of my designer clients are starting to ask for more POC models, and that's been really nice to see that the demand for that is going up and being utilized. More LGBTQ models, couples, more what's the term I'm looking for? I did a set with a girl with a walker, mobility aids, that kind of thing. and different body types, all of that. But the authors have to write it in order for us to be able to design it.
Jake?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, kind of like Kelley said, you know, if that's not what's been written, then that's not, you know, it's a custom job, so we're going to do, you know, a custom work. So if it's not being written like that, well, then we're going to go with whatever's been written. Also, in regards to making pre-mades, when we make pre-mades, same thing, you know, you're trying to make sure that you're releasing a product that can hopefully appeal to somebody's going to buy it. So, you know, the more broader spectrum you can hit with whatever genre you're aiming for, the better off you're going to be. So you kind of play the odds of what's popular in that genre, you know, at that time. And also, I mean, for authors, releasing a cover or getting a cover made, it's a risk reward system. I mean, you can risk doing something that is not done typically in, you know, say urban fantasy. You can risk going some, you know, a different kind of style or a different approach or a different look or whatever. The chance of that is maybe you get a unique cover everybody loves and it helps, you know, sell your book. The risk for that is everybody skips over it because that's not what people in that genre are looking for. And so, you know, you kind of have to think about it from a consumer approach of, you know, like when you're on Netflix, you know, you're going to spend, you know, a second looking at this thumbnail, deciding whether or not I want to be interested in whatever I'm looking at. And people do that same thing when they're cold browsing in Amazon, you know, or wherever. You know, they're going to see an image, and if that's the image they've seen in other covers or not, you know, if that same style has been seen in other covers that they typically like, they're going to be more apt to click on it. You know, so it's a risk reward if you're going to try and buck trends or not. And so really the great place to be is stay on trend but be unique. And so and that's kind of that's a tough, you know, a line to toe. But yeah, it's a risk reward type thing when it comes to doing that kind of stuff. And I know people complain, you know, oh, I see the leather jacket lady and the flowy hair all the time. I think that same thing when I do it sometimes. I'm like, and that 16 book series I mentioned, and I don't mean to keep bringing up that I did 16 covers. It's not that big a deal. But she's got a leather jacket, and she's got some like short flowy hair, and she's got some magic in her hands. And that's what we did for the entire run, you know. And it was, you know, we didn't reinvent the wheel, but that's what those readers are looking for. And so, you know, why fight it, you know, as far as it goes. So.
And trad publishers have very different rules on what they can get away with than indie publishers do. They've got the big marketing budgets that they can start the trends. We just kind of have to ride them and try to keep up.
Yep, I agree.
I wanted to add, a lot of authors will come to me and they were like, how do I stand out? And I think I understand where the impulse comes from because we're creative people and we're trying to do something new, you know, and that's how you approach your writing. And you don't want to just churn out the same novel that someone else wrote a month ago. You know what I'm saying? So I understand that impulse. In most cases, I personally think it's the wrong impulse to follow because the covers are language is what they are. They are communicating with your audience and telling them this is the book for you. This is because when readers, I kind of feel like sometimes authors break the mold where authors tend to be omnivorous readers and we will read across a wide range of genres. Most people read in one genre and they read a lot of books in that one genre. And so there's a language that develops that they respond to because they're looking for the same emotional experience that they had in that last book that they really enjoyed. They're looking to repeat that emotional experience. And so when they're evaluating the covers, they're saying, is this something that's going to give me the same hit that I got with the last one? You know what I'm saying? So the language that develops will differ a little bit depending on subgenre. Like I'm just going to talk about fantasy. Epic fantasy is going to look a little bit different than Portal fantasy, and Portal fantasy is going to look a little bit different than sword and sorcery or grimdark fantasy. You know what I'm saying? There's going to be a slightly different dialect for the language with each subgenre, which is why I think it's so important for authors to do the back end work of figuring out what is it I have written? Who is it that is going to be buying what I have written? When I feel like a lot of authors, when they come at like what should be on my cover, they think what is my story? When what they should be thinking is, who is my audience? Who am I communicating with? and then just come back to that realization, especially if you personally really dislike the tropes that are used on covers in your genre. Remember that the cover is not for you. It's not for you. I mean, it's wonderful if you see it and you love it and it speaks to you, but who you really needed to speak to is the person that's gonna click on it and then click that buy button. You know, that it creates a funnel to bring the right audience to your blurb, who then brings a narrower, even more defined audience to your book. So whatever the artwork is that you need to attract that ideal audience, that's what you've got to have on the cover. I mean, if it's got to be like a picture of the bottom of your shoe and that's what's going to speak to your audience, do it, man, do it. There are some genres like urban fantasy, for instance, that are very saturated. Not only they're very saturated, but the covers there are some of the legends of the indie cover industry have been producing in those genres for years. So your competition is really, really, really stiff. But also the genre tropes are very defined. There are other genres where the tropes aren't necessarily as defined. She doesn't have to wear a leather jacket. You know what I'm saying? So some genres, the tropes are going to be more defined. Some of them are going to be a little bit less defined, and you'll have a little bit more flexibility. But the market really does drive that language. And the best thing that you can do is to signal that genre really strongly and do it really, really well. That's how you should stand out. Do it well.
One of the worst things that I think a client can send to me, especially a new client I haven't worked with before, when I ask them, what are some books that are similar to yours so that we can look up, you know, what genres we need to be hitting, and they say there's nothing out there like mine.
Oh yeah.
It's a contemporary romance, vampire, fantasy, time travel, and nothing out there exists like this. It's like, okay, great, but no one's going to pick it up if you're not figuring out who it is that you're wanting to target.
And it probably does exist. For those of you who don't know, I used to have a audio drama podcast, so a fiction podcast. And the first season was a suspense story about Bigfoot. And a fan wrote me a tongue-in-cheek comment when he heard that I was moving into writing books. And he said, hey, if you want to make a living from this stuff, all you should write is Bigfoot porn. And I thought he was joking. There's literally Bigfoot. I had no idea. So you're absolutely right, Kelley. When authors say there's nothing out there like what I'm writing, no, literally there is. It's out there somewhere.
It's out there somewhere.
And we're not trying to rob you of your creativity or saying that you have ripped someone off or that we're just stamping out a mold or what. But genres are intended to be broad. And just because the specifics of your story are different than the specifics of another story doesn't mean that they don't fit in the same genre together, because genre is an artificial construct. It's a box that we made up. It's a label, okay? A book is not science fiction. A book is its own creature, you know, it is its own world, and it is unique to itself and to the author that produced it. We call it science fiction because it has enough attributes in common with other books also called science fiction, and you're trying to target the readers who enjoy those attributes in their book. It doesn't mean you're a hack writer and we think your book is just the same as everybody else's. Right. It means that genres are intended to be broad, and just because you have unique elements of your book, of course you do, every book does, doesn't mean that you don't fall within that genre at some point.
They're like sandwiches. You can have 20,000 types of bread, 20,000 types of middles, and they're all sandwiches, but some of them are going to be peanut butter and jelly with 5 different types of jelly. I mean,
I like that metaphor.
And sometimes it's if you do have a story that's really a crossover between genres and it's kind of weirdly placed, sometimes you just have to pick one and kind of cater to that instead of trying to cram all of it into one cover.
Yeah.
I'm sure all three of you have seen that though, right? The writer who tells you all the things that have to be on the cover.
That almost pretty much guarantees the cover's going to bomb. If you have a list of, I got all of these things, I know. I'm like, oh, this is one that's not going in my portfolio.
That's it.
I think we can all agree that So one of the things that I hear a lot of is, and maybe there's a question that already focuses on this, is some people saying that they feel certain designers have pre-mades that look better than the custom work that they do. And I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, the reason for that is because some clients, not all clients, I have some clients that are amazing with letting me just do my job, but if you're nitpicking a cover too much and you're trying too hard to change the direction of where it's going, chances are it's not going to turn out as good as something that we started from scratch and did from beginning to end with no outside interference.
I actually have something that really pertains to that. A while back, I had a cover with an established client, and we'd worked before, and we worked well together, but we agreed on a concept, and I started executing the concept, and it was, I thought it was going well till we got to a certain point where he started to come back with me, well, can you tweak this? Can you make that stand out more? Can you include this little aspect in the background? And it was tweak after tweak. And I watched the cover go from something that I was super proud of, that I just was like, I made that, you know, I made that. I was so proud of it. And I just watched it just nosedive. There was just, it was a spiral of despair is what was happening. And I was so sad about it. And then we were getting close to the end. I was like praying we were close to the end, because by this time I just, let me out of this.
I'm done. I'm tapping out.
But I mean, I was going to give him what he wanted because he had some very specific, we worked a lot together, and I was like, man, and of course I would voice my concerns to him if there was something that was going to hurt it. And I would say, I think this might be a problem, but ultimately you're the boss, you know, you're the one writing the check. So I got to do what you say. But I took a risk and I redid the cover, and it was work that I knew I would probably would be lost. Okay. I redid the cover and I sent him an email, and I was like, listen, if I was making this cover for myself, this is what I'd do. And he was like, oh my gosh, that's it. That's what I've been trying to get to this whole time. He's like, it's perfect. It's perfect. It's like, there were things that he wasn't satisfied with, but he didn't know how to articulate it. And so we kept on going down this spiral of, well, maybe if you make this brighter, maybe if you make that stand out more. Whereas when I finally went back to if I was making this cover for myself with no restrictions on me, this is what it be. And that ended up being the final draft. And I am super proud of that cover.
I love that story. I love that story. So, but I mean, for us and anybody who's going to watch this in the future, a couple things to keep in mind, right? Rebekah said it's not for us. Before we even get into discussions with a designer, maybe it would behoove us to keep running that on repeat in our head before we enter it's not for me, it's not for me, it's not. So we have that emotional distance and we don't necessarily get into it. And then you got to trust your designers. I'm not a visual person. I need my design. It's like, here, let me give us something that maybe us writers can relate to. Think about yourself when you take that precious first, second, third draft to your local writers group, and you sit at that table with them and you tell them what you want to get out of it. Somebody else gives you feedback on your comma splices and your italics and the voice. You had a character say it a certain way because you know that character. Trust your designer to know the cover design aspects of it, please.
Okay, this is all predicated on you having chosen the right designer. Choosing the right designer, in my opinion, is the one most critical thing. If you have chosen the right designer, if you have chosen your designer well, if you vetted their portfolio, you know that they can produce, if they have a track record, you know they can produce what it is that you're looking for. I think that's hugely important, is to hire the right designer, because I have watched authors trust their designers and end up with just some terrible covers because they didn't choose the right designer on the front end. So yes, definitely trust your designer, but make sure you've hired the right person. And once you've hired the right person, let them do their job.
Go ahead, Kelley. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I've gotten, within the last 3 months, I've gotten like 4 people who have emailed me with questions about covers, who wrote nonfiction or, Christian romance stuff that I have not done don't have any of it in my portfolio. So I don't know what it was that led them to me. And I just kind of have to let them know, like, I'm not going to be a good match for this. I could churn something out and I can't promise that it's going to sell your book.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. I kind of want to hit that theme that we were just hitting on there with Trisha's question that she sent to the group, because topically it kind of relates to what we just said, and maybe it'll give us an opportunity to kind of pull out a little bit of finer points for us getting into those of us who are trying to find our first designer or find a new designer and we feel like we made huge mistakes in the past. So Trisha said, what determines that quality of a book cover? I've seen pre-mades in the same genre with a $300 difference in cost, and I cannot say why one is worth more than the other. And this is for the same services, ebook, wrap, etc. So kind of what you were all just hitting on there at the end, can you kind of maybe give us a little bit of insight into what those possibilities could be?
I'll go. Time is a factor. It's also, like Rebekah had touched on earlier, how in demand that designer is. If you're wanting a Becky Frank cover and she's booked out for a year or two, but she's got a pre-made up, I mean, and that's going to be your only chance to get one of her covers for the next several years, I mean, you're going to be willing to pay $200-300 for that versus someone else's cover for $150. Yeah, okay. And it's worth it because
It's Becky Frank.
It's Becky Frank, and it's not just beautiful art, but she knows what she's doing. She knows her genre. She's got that track record. If a new designer comes on the scene, their stuff may be gorgeous, but until they've got that track record and that level of trust where they've built up, clients that have worked with them and have used their stuff and know that it's legit, they're just not going to be able to come right out the gate and charge an astronomical fee.
For me, the difference in pre-made price, just with my own pre-mades, is there will be a difference in price depending on, because I illustrate, a lot of the elements that I use in my pre-mades are illustrated, and it will depend on, honestly, it will depend on how many original illustrated elements there are in the pre-made and how much time that took me. As much as I say that it's not like an hourly wage situation, the time is a factor, and so, and how many of the elements in the cover are truly unique. I mean, am I using a stock background, that sort of thing. So that will affect my personal pre-made rates. I think across the board, pre-made rates can vary widely. And I think the biggest reason there is a variance is because you have to understand that the cover design industry is populated with freelancers, some of which who have never worked in any, they're self-taught basically. They've not necessarily worked in any corporate art environment, which can make it a little bit tricky for authors because there's not necessarily an industry standard for a lot of things. There's not necessarily a widely accepted best practices. There's not necessarily a widely accepted price point for everything. So you're gonna have people offering their best guess at what they should be offering it for. And there are going to be artists who, for them, this is just a side gig, okay? They've got a job. This is just to get, eating out money or whatever. And it's more important to them to have the turnover, even if they're pricing their art low, just to have some income coming in. Whereas there are going to be other artists who, this is my job. This is my living. This is my career, and I price that according to what it takes for me to maintain that career and not like have to eat ramen every night. You know what I'm saying? So it's going to vary for those reasons too. And here's the thing is when you're trying to figure out whether or not there's a significant difference in how well something will sell your book, I think that goes back to how well you are educated on the language of your genre. But the problem is that some writers, you're just not. This was one of the biggest surprises for me working in the independent publishing industry, is some writers just aren't visual. They literally cannot tell the difference between a crappy cover and a good one. They cannot tell. They look the same to them. And if you are one of those people and you know that you are one of those people, your ability to get a good cover and to pay the right price for your cover is going to be dependent on you having a cabinet of educated people who you can rely on their opinions for things. I think one of the biggest tragedies that I see especially on Facebook, is watching other authors ask other authors for their opinion on their covers. Other authors who may or may not be visual people or have any artistic inclination or education or understanding. And I have watched some serious situations of the blind leading the blind. Reach out, even if reach out to experienced, if you're unsure of whether or not you're investing in the right designer, or if this portfolio is the right thing for you, or this is the right way to hit your genre, ask questions. There are communities of designers available online. We are friendly people. We are willing to help. We'll talk to you. I think the backbone is that education yourself. But if you aren't able to make those determinations necessarily yourself, talk to somebody who can, to somebody who has experience.
There's a Facebook group called the Cover Clinic that people can post their covers into and get designer feedback, and the designers will tag what genres they specialize in, whether they're a historical romance designer, if they're urban fantasy, so that you know what their kind of qualifications are. And I think that's a lot more effective than something like the Indie Cover Project, where you've got 300 comments from people half the time saying different stuff, and like Rebekah said, just the blind leading the blind, where you're gonna drive your designer batty when you come back with a list of 40 different things, minor tweaks that need to be changed because so and so on Facebook said so.
Jake, I saw your eyes roll on that one. We've had discussions on that.
I'll tell you, I just finished a job, and that's what it was, man. It was, in terms of the latter part of this conversation about the feedback and stuff, whether you're getting on a cover, whether you're getting it for a cover or you're asking for feedback just to find a cover designer, I guess. I mean, if you ask for feedback on the internet, you're going to get feedback. Like, it's just, it'll never end. Even if it was statistically the best cover that had ever been created,
someone's going to have a go at you. Yeah.
And you've got 1,000 people who say, yes, I love it, leave it alone. You're going to have 10 people who go, well, everybody liked it, I can find something wrong with it. And they're going to have and I hate to say that that's the way it is, but that's the way it is. And if you would have posted that cover tomorrow, you're going to have 10 different people that are going to talk about it. And those 10 people that posted something today, they didn't even go online tomorrow, and then you're going to have people who, my daughter can talk about the steak I make. She's not qualified to critique the steak I make. She can say something about it. I don't like it.
No
Daddy.
Michelin stars from your daughter.
Right. Well, what I'm saying? So, she can say something, but she shouldn't be the one saying, or, take my mom. My mom, she's 75 years old. She can't critique my guy stabbing another guy on my cover, because she's going to be like, it's too bloody. No, Mom, it's going to sell. So, I digress from that point. If you're getting public feedback, you need to be very, very careful. And if you're going to go somewhere big, like, as ICP, I always think about the band ICP and the clown face. Anyways, if you're going to go somewhere public, you need to know that you're going to get feedback. And just because somebody posts it doesn't mean they're qualified, and doesn't mean that it's true. If they say, I don't like it because of this, well, that's just their opinion. It doesn't mean that it's actually accurate. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
I don't,
There have been instances where I have been in like a cover group or whatever, and I can fix their problem, okay? Because I know exactly what the issue is with that cover, and I can fix it, okay? I have experience. I am good at my job, you know what I'm saying? And I go in there and I'm like, dude, you got to do this and this. And then 15, I don't even know who these people are. I don't know if they are designers. I don't know if they're authors. I don't know if they're published. I don't know if they've ever done any genre research in their lives. I don't know. They're all like, no, that's not the problem. And I'm like, great, okay, well, I tried, man.
But I understand the client. I understand, especially a new author or a first-time author, wanting to make sure their cover is going to do well, and they want to get feedback. I understand that mentality. I would just say if you're getting feedback, I would say you need to have like 8 people or less give you feedback, and they should hopefully be qualified people or people that have your best interest at heart. So people, not your friend, Jay, who you went to high school with, is going to be like, yeah, man, I love it. He's somebody who actually cares about you and your success as an author, who can say, hey, I don't like it. If that's the case, that's not a good cover. You have trusted people, and if you want to take it wide, but just bear in mind that you're going to get wide opinions at that point, and just because they say something doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. But I understand, you want to make sure that, it's going to do well, and you want other people to give you that feedback. You want to know before the cover gets released that, hey, I've gotten people who say this cover rocks and it's good. So I understand that mindset. You just need to be careful in the online forums that you go to for your feedback. And like the Cover Clinic, it's a great place. They're great. It's very, very good feedback. But there's other places that can be, like you said earlier, Paul, it can just turn into a mess. And it can
and horrible writers, remember what we've always said in the group. I have pushed it and pushed it and pushed it because it leads everything else. What are your goals? If it's a memoir and it's only of personal wealth to you, meaning that memory, something you can leave for your children, your grandchildren, and you've got a sandy beach with sand dunes in front of it, and that's the thing that works for you because that's what you want, that's going to be a different conversation than if I go to Jake and I say, hey, I'm doing urban fantasy and I want to sell so many that I can get my own theme park at Universal Parks, right? Then I need to keep that in mind when I'm going to people. And, I keep if it's anything else for anybody in the group, the questions I usually ask anybody for feedback is, what genre is this to you? And that's all I ask. That's all I ask. What genre does this say? Okay, so we've got 13 minutes, and I want to see if we can get as much as we can, but I promised one of our viewers that I would follow up on this question, Rebekah. So if you can, or anybody, but Rebekah, you made the statement, so this might be something you can knock out real quick. And then we'll go into a lightning round. So those of you who listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk, he does lightning. I don't have a bell. I don't have a funny comedic sidekick. We'll just have to do our best with this. Rebekah, how do you know, capital letters, how do you know you got the right designer? I know this goes back like 2 questions ago, but what is it? What are we going to feel? What's that sign point that we got the right designer?
I have a client who is my favorite client. He knows who he is, okay? And we started talking about his book, and we started talking about the kind of fiction that we enjoy along the same lines. And there was an immediate gel. I'd watched all the movies that he'd watched. There was an immediate gel, and that is it's not something I can necessarily articulate exactly what that meant, but we were absolutely on the best wavelength, same wavelength. And I have done some of my absolute best work for him, and it has been. You're not going to get that every time. I don't think necessarily that's always like the most realistic goal. I think what you need to shoot for, if you can't find that person that just, I've told this client, I've been like, Richard, if I had a muse, it would be you, because there's just something about his ideas and my art that just, it's like music. And that's not always going to be the case, but to get the best chances of having a designer that you communicate well with, I think that you really need to vet the portfolio. Their portfolio needs to show the kind of work that you need on your cover. If their portfolio doesn't show that, okay, you can take the risk if you want to, okay? If you want to take the risk and see if maybe they can pull it out. But that's going to be a much bigger risk than going with someone who has proven they can provide the kind of art that you're looking for, in the, not necessarily the specifics, I want this exact cover, but the tone, the style, the mood, that sort of thing, so that you can find, I don't think you should ever be in a position of approaching a designer and saying, hey, can you do this? If my portfolio doesn't say I can do it, I'm probably not your best bet. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I have done work in every major genre, okay? But everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses, and you are going to see what that designer is best at by what is in their portfolio. See, and I also always really recommend reach out and talk to a designer a little bit before you hire them, because so much of the relationship and whether or not that turns into a really rewarding, productive relationship is how well you communicate. Do you communicate well? And that's just going to have to be a judgment call on your case. If you are unsure about the artistic side of it, if you're looking at their portfolio and you're like, I think this is good, but I'm not a judge, ask someone who does know, come to the cover clinic and say, or DM, someone, an artist, an experienced cover designer who works in that genre and say, hey, is this a good cover? Or is this a good example of somebody who can do good work for me? Is this what I'm looking for? Can I be confident in this choice? And see what they have to say.
And so person who sent me that, let me know if you're good with that. Rebekah's always open for questions anyway, so we can chat later. Okay, so lightning round, folks. If you have questions, get them in real quick. But for our 3 panelists, please keep them as brief as you can, because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 I really would like to be able to get to, if I can, in 8 minutes. I don't know how we're going to do this. Here we go. Paperback versus ebook versus audiobook. Are there differences in designing those covers that we need to be thinking about when we come to you?
It helps if I know ahead of time, just so I can kind of, especially for ebook or in paperback, whether I lay out a full spread of artwork versus whether I'm just designing as a 2,000 by 3,000, front cover.
Jake?
For me, no, but it does go back to what Kelley just said. I mean, it's good to know if you're going to do audio, because especially the right side of the cover, or even right and left, because sometimes designers just design in that one vertical rectangle, and so the edges are very sharp. And so if you do have to make a square, you just kind of run out of space. You have to either, you have to go back in and do more work to add that extra 2 inches or whatever, as far as it goes. That's about the biggest thing. For me, when I design wide anyways, so for me, audio covers are just mainly just formatting at that point. But yeah, knowing that ahead of time that you're going to do it, let the designer know. The paperbacks, the paperback and e-cover are essentially the same thing. You can go into it knowing you're going to do a full wrap, and the designer may do, more stuff toward the back. But once you get to the back cover, it's all about more about the blurb and making sure it's just easily readable and easily, accessible. So.
Let me know if you don't need a wrap. If you don't need a wrap, you just need the ebook because it's like a novella you're not going to have printed or whatever. Let me know. It'll save me some time. I'll appreciate it. But other than that, just tell us what you have in mind, and we'll make sure it happens.
And let's start reverse order. This time we'll go Rebekah J. Kelley, especially since you just made that comment. Rebekah, leads perfect segue into my next one. Ways for authors to save a little bit of dough on their covers. Neat little things you've seen?
Here's the thing is I'm a big champion of pre-mades. Even though the majority of my work is custom, I think pre-mades are a really, really good option for artists with a tight budget or who are just starting their careers and they need to do a little experimentation. One of the things authors seem to think I'm going to get a forever cover and that's going to be on my cover for the rest of eternity. That's not how books work. That's not even how they work in the publishing, the traditional publishing industry, is that it's not necessarily going to be a forever thing. It can be if you get like a Tom Edwards cover. Why change it? You know what I'm saying? But oh shoot, I just had a mind wipe. How to save some dough. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's true. What was I talking about? So definitely look at pre-mades. Even if it's like not quite perfect to the specifics of your book, but if it communicates the overall intent of the book, it can absolutely do the job. A really, really, really good pre-made can absolutely do the job better than an adequate custom cover. You know what I'm saying? Or a budget custom cover. You know what I'm saying? So look at pre-mades for sure. I think authors don't look at them as an option as often as they should. If you're going for a series, consider making the investment for the series all at once and seeing if you can get a multiple book. There are also a lot of designers who are doing something called custom pre-mades, where you pitch a concept at them, they create the cover, you look at it, if it's good, you buy it, if not, they sell it as a pre-made to somebody else. And usually that'll be a much lower cost, but there's usually no feedback. there's no revisions on that. So
That's a neat idea.
it's an option.
Jake?
What Rebekah said. Hey,
Kelley?
Yeah, what Rebekah said. My lowest package is I call it my easy peasy package, and it's kind of similar to a custom pre-made in the sense that they send me the images that they want to use, or at least some ideas for images. They get one round of revisions, and that's it. And that's going to be the cheapest, for them, and it works great for clients that I've worked with for years that just say, here you go, do your thing, it's going to look fine, and saves them some money and lets me help them out.
I've got one question I'm going to throw in there, so we only have two more, and one of them includes you, talking about you before we go. But this one I forgot to ask earlier, and I'm going to ask for a one-word answer from all three of you, if you can, please. If I frame this correctly, it should work. Do you accept art that was created by the writer, they drew it themselves, do you accept that to incorporate in their book design, that you're working for them?
One word answer, depends.
Okay, there we go. Jake?
No.
No. Rebekah?
No.
No. Okay, so there we go. All right. Last big question. Last words of warning for us authors looking to work with a designer. Jake, why don't we start? I don't think we started with you in a while.
Sure. Words of warning. I mean, like Rebekah said, do your research, find a designer that's doing what you want for the cover. If they're not doing what you're after, they're not the one for you. I would say in my best author designer experiences, it's like 80% me and 20% them, as far as it goes. Like, basically, give me the ball and let me run, coach, and I'll go get a touchdown. And that's a slider that will be different for designers. But from talking to other designers, let us do our thing, because we're visually wired people, and we know what visually looks good. And so I've never met a designer who's like, man, I want to do a bad job. So so we always want to do a good job, and so let them run with it, And I'd also, one final note about that: details don't sell covers.
Yeah.
That doesn't. I mean, I understand. If the main character is holding the dagger, and it has to be a certain style or whatever, and you want that dagger on there, great. You should ask for it. At the end of the day, if the dagger takes up, 0.001 square inches of your cover, it's not going to sell that cover. So
it's for you. It's for the author. It's right. For the author.
Yeah. Don't get lost in those details. You should ask for them, but also there's a line where you cross into. You need to. It's not that big a deal. It's not going to sell anything. I've literally had a client ask me, and this is like, I remember this just 2 years ago when this happened. This guy said, "Can the castle in the background be 10% bigger?" And I thought, yes, it can. Sure. I mean, but that castle 10% bigger is not going to make anybody buy this cover or not buy this cover. So, there's some things in there that aren't necessarily, they're more tertiary of importance. So, so just bear that in mind. So anyways,
Rebekah?
that's it.
I want authors to understand that as creative people, our artists and writers are very similar. We are very similar. Treat the artists the way you would want to be treated as a creative person in your career. We want the same things. We want creative fulfillment. We want recognition for our work. We want to be paid enough to, pay our rent. We want some creative control over the products that we produce, we want the same things, artists and writers. So treat the artists the way you would want to be treated as a creative person in the field, and understand we want the same thing you do. We want your book to sell like crazy. We want the same thing. We have the same goal. So just keep that in mind. Artists and writers, we're very much the same. So if you approach that relationship as a collaborative, we're partners kind of relationship, you're much more likely to have a productive, positive relationship that's going to last you, as long as you want it to, rather than if you're approaching the people who are providing your services with the idea of, I'm just going to squeeze as much of it what I can get out of them. You know, if you approach it like that, you're going to have some crazy turnover. It's going to be an unpleasant process, and nobody's going to like you. So be cool, man. Be cool.
If you're in horrible writing, you remember that post a couple of weeks ago that I caught off of Facebook where the guy complained he was being ripped off because he was being charged more than the $33 a cover that he was being charged by his designer.
I remember that.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys all remember that one.
Post, yeah.
That was a disaster. Okay, Kelley, what about you?
I mean, we've given a lot of very similar advice between the three of us, but every designer is different, just like every client is going to be different. I know some designers who prefer to have you kind of, this is exactly what I want to see. You know, these are all the details I want to include, and they do better with that. I don't know of many of them, but I do know a couple of my friends that are that way. I work better when you give me your brief, tell me what your characters look like, give me some examples of what you want, and I can run with it. Those end up being my best work. I don't do well when I'm being micromanaged and having someone leaning over my shoulder. Like Jake said, can we make that 10% bigger? Because I've had those clients too that, can we move this just this much to the right? It's like, no one's going to care. No one is going to care except for me, because I now have to go back in and make that change. And you know, those 15-minute, 10-minute changes, when there's 10 of them, really do start to add up.
All right, so you all have been absolutely amazing. You've given us so much today. How can we stay in contact with you, i.e. meaning how can we find your portfolio, see what you're all about, and maybe have a chance to work with you in the future? Where can we find you? Kelley?
You can Google Sleepy Fox Studio, sleepyfoxstudio.net. I'm sure we can all post it in the event page too. And I also have a Facebook group where I post pre-mades and renders and sales and things like that.
Excellent. Jake?
Yeah, same thing. jcalebdesign.com is my main website. I have a Facebook page, you know, just like Kelley, where I release one pre-made a week. I've been doing it for almost 3 years now. And so one every week, and you know, you can hang out with me, and I'm pretty active over there, and you can chit chat and, you know, whatever. So.
And his pre-mades are awesome. They are works of art.
One of the things that I don't know if all of you do that, for the writers in the group, to appreciate how much we don't know about this, unless you guys do that as a job. I don't. Jake will go out and he'll post a time-lapse video of a design, like when he's building a cover, and it's the most ridiculous thing in the world to watch that. It's awesome. I mean, it helps you appreciate the stuff they go through to create these beautiful things for you. All right, and Rebekah?
I'm www.vividcovers.com. Almost said the wrong URL. I'm also on Facebook. I have a group. I post pre-mades there. You can search for Rebekah Haskell. There's a few of us, but I don't know. You'll figure it out. I have Vivid Covers on my banner. Anybody who has any questions, I spend a lot of time trying to help authors just make the right decisions and be more educated about covers. So if you have a question, just send me a message. I will respond.
And
Same with me.
Horrible Writers, I will put all the links. I'll talk to these folks offline after we're done, and I'll get these links. And I'll put them in the not only the event, but I'll post it on the page and the file area. Remember, we've got the resources area, or on the file area on the left-hand side of Facebook. There's a little resources doc in there with links. I'll make sure all three of these fine folks get their website contact information in there. All right, everybody, we did it. We survived our first ever live conversation. This was absolutely epic. You all are epic. And to Kelley, Jake, and Rebekah, thank you so much for sharing this stuff with us.
Thank you for setting it all up.
It was a good time. We might have to do this again in the future.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
This has been Horrible Writing, and hopefully after this episode, you suck less than you did at the beginning. I am Paul Sading, your host extraordinaire. You can find me over on the Twitterverse @WritingHorrible and over at paulsading.com/horrible-writing. Until next time, suck less.